Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the broadcast. Today is Wednesday, February 7th, 2018. I'm Sean. Website is www.scriptureandprophecy.com. Today we are working through our study in the Gospel of Matthew. We're ready for chapter 14, which deals with the death of John the Baptist, deals with the feeding of the 5,000, and deals with Jesus walking on water. And so, not a very long chapter, but a chapter full of all kinds of different things that we've all heard about. And so that's what we're going to be reviewing today. Also, if it works out, I have an interesting podcast for you on Friday. Lord willing, we're going to talk about something that was found written in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I just think is interesting, and I think you might find it interesting. And it'll probably go along with our In the Days of Noah series, which I'm planning on adding a lot more material to. So Lord willing, that is the plan for now. But one thing I've learned, especially here recently, is that my plans and reality are often two different things, aren't they? So we shall see. You know, the scriptures say, don't say tomorrow I'm going to do this and that. Say if the Lord wills, because tomorrow is not promised to any man, right? And so that's the attitude I try to have. Hey, if the Lord wills, come Friday, this is what I plan on doing. And so that's, just thought I'd give you a little heads up on that. All right, let's dig into the Gospel of Matthew, and we'll start here with verse 1. Matthew chapter 14, verse 1. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus, and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist, he is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John, and bound him, and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her. Real quick, I want to just make sure you understand what's going on here. Herod had taken his brother's wife, Herodias, and we already see the problem with that already, right? And then it turned, and John the Baptist, he was imprisoned, had called him out on it and said that, hey, what you're doing is wrong. And sometimes we hear, especially in the church today and in our PC culture today, oh, don't you dare, you must obey the government in every way. You must never say anything, and, you just be passive, and, that's the Christian walk. That's what Jesus would have did. He just would have been passive. And I think I'm looking at John the Baptist, and he's calling out the king, saying, hey, it's wrong. It's a sin. It goes against God's law for you to have your brother's wife. And so, I think I would be more interested in following the example of John the Baptist and of Jesus based on what the Bible says versus what our society and culture says today, which is that we are to be weak and passive, and we shouldn't call out all the evil that's going on. And so I don't need to go on a tangent here. I just thought it's interesting. John the Baptist potentially lost his life for just standing up for truth. Moving forward, verse 5. And when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. And then I have to stop again, just say, this is the type of wickedness and perversion that's going on, in these upper elite situations, and it's just as bad, if not more grotesque today than it was at this time. But here you have the king. He takes his brother's wife, and here he has his brother's wife's daughter, which would be his niece / stepdaughter, dancing before him and his friends. Verse 7. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, Give me here John Baptist's head in a charger. And the king was sorry. Nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given to her. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison. And his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel. And she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took up the body and buried it, and went and told Jesus. When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion toward them, and healed their sick. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, This is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the village, and buy themselves victuals. But Jesus said unto them, They need not depart. Give ye them to eat. And they say unto him, We have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He said, Bring them hither to me. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and he took 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and were filled. And they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Alright, so we have, first of all, Jesus hears about what happened with John the Baptist, and he gets in a ship and tries to get some space, tries to get to that quiet space into the desert. And you see Jesus doing this a lot, and we're going to see it here again, but I want to just go ahead and talk about it. Jesus would often depart to be alone with God. And I think that that's a model that we need to follow. We need to be taking that time. I believe firmly that you should do it. Look, I don't want to put any religious stuff out there and say this is the way it has to be, or because it doesn't. But the way I try to handle it is, first thing when I get up, I go into my office, I close the door, and I start the day by praying and asking for forgiveness, repenting of sins, seeking God's face, giving him my petition, thanking him for all that I have. The scriptures say that all good gifts come from God. So everything that you have in your life, has been given to you by God. You don't deserve it. You're not special. You're not extra smart. You're not all these things. All good gifts you have are because God has given them to you. Just like here, Christ is multiplying the bread and the fish and feeding the people. It all comes from God. So if you've got a cupboard full of food, and you've got a roof over your head, and you've got transportation, which right now I'm struggling with because my wife's car the engine is shot. And so we're having to both get up way earlier than even we normally would, so that if we can share the one car to get us put to work, and there's a lot more just having a vehicle and a way to get to your job is a blessing, and having a place of employment so that you can provide your family with, so you can put food on the table, and you can have insurance when your family gets sick, and all these things you should be on your knees thanking God for. And let me bring this full circle. Jesus would depart to the desert to pray, or go into a high mountain and pray. And so what I try to do is I start the morning that way, praying, giving thanks, repenting, and putting my petition forth, and then praying for people, praying for the United States of America. And then, of course, throughout the day, we talk to God, throughout our day as we're going along. Sometimes it's in our heads or, praying in our minds or whatever. And then at night, before I lay down, I pray another prayer, thanking God for the day and asking Him to protect us through the night and to fill my dreams and thoughts with thoughts of Him. And the point I'm trying to get across is it's important to find what, some people call it a prayer closet, whatever it is. Find that space where you can get alone with God and spend time with Him. That's how you build a relationship with anyone. It's you spend some quality time. And there's no one more important to build a relationship with and spend quality time with than your Heavenly Father. And we're going to see that right again here. So Jesus feeds the 5,000, then we get to verse 22. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship, and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, Is it a spirit? And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spoke unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go by Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore did thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. And they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth thou art the Son of God. Now, of course, it's interesting enough that Jesus would walk on the water. I believe it's Job chapter 8, verse 9. I believe that when God's talking about his attributes, one of them is that, I brought it up. Now I've got to find it, don't I? But before I do, let me get to a couple of my points. So Jesus is walking on the water, and Peter's like, hey, if it's really you, let me come out, ask me to come onto the water. And so he does, and so Peter himself, because of his faith in the power of Christ, is walking on the water. But when the trouble came, right, and can this not be a metaphor for our own lives? We're like, yes, praise Jesus. I believe that Jesus, and I believe that God is looking out for me and is for me and is with me. But then when the wind comes, right, and trouble starts to be a mist in your life, you start to doubt, well, maybe God's not paying attention to me, maybe. And what happens here? Peter, the wind, it says the wind became boisterous, and then he was afraid. And because of his fear, which is the opposite of faith, he began to sink. But then he does something that we all need to remember and that we all need to do in the time of trouble. He cried out saying, Lord, save me. He wasn't trying to save himself. Lord, save me. And what happened? Immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him up and said, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? Why did you doubt? You see, fear is the opposite of faith. And when you have great faith, you can walk on water. But the minute you let fear come in and you start to doubt, and you start to say, oh, maybe God's not looking out for me. Oh, this situation doesn't look good. These bad things are happening to me. I'm going through a rough time right now. maybe God's mad at me, maybe he's not paying attention, and your lack of, and you begin to develop a lack of faith, and you begin to be afraid of your circumstances. You begin to sink. And I just thought that was just an interesting and really interesting metaphor for our own lives. Let me see if I can find that verse for you real quick since I brought it up. Hopefully it'll just take me a second here. Job 9:8. I had it right. So God's going through his attributes to Job, and he says, one of them is, which alone spreadeth out the heavens and treadeth upon the waves of the sea. And here we have Jesus doing that exact same thing, walking on the water. 3 more verses left. Verse 34. And when they were gone over, they came into the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place had knowledge of him, they sent out into all that country round about, and brought unto him all that were diseased, and besought him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched were made perfectly whole. Now that reminds me, that passage, you have these people, they're thinking to themselves, if only we touch the hem of this garment, we'll be made whole. And it actually says that as many as touched were made perfectly whole. Their faith, their belief that Christ could heal them, healed them. And we have that story of the woman who had the chronic bleeding problem. It was back in chapter 9. It says, and behold, a woman which is diseased with an issue of blood 12 years came behind him, and touched the hem of his garment, for she said within herself, if I may but touch his garment, I shall be whole. And if you remember, after she touched his garment, she was made whole, and Jesus felt the power leave him. Notice he didn't do anything. It wasn't like he was putting his hands on her and healing her. Her faith, believing that if she could just get close enough to Messiah, she would be healed her. And he even turns and he even confirms that, and he says, your faith has healed you. And so I guess the theme of everything we're talking about today, and I didn't really plan half of this conversation, is faith. Faith. You walk out onto the water. You take that leap of faith, even to walk on the sea. And you can do that if you only believe. But the moment you let fear, the opposite of faith, come in, you begin to sink. This woman in Matthew chapter 9, verses 20 and 21, thought to herself, if only I could touch his garment, I'll be made whole. And she touched him, and she had dealt with this issue for 12 years, this illness. And she is made whole again. And all these people in this city, says that, and they besought him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched were made perfectly whole, because they believed. They had faith in Messiah and the power that he had. Great lesson for all of us. Well, hey, that is the podcast for this morning. And pray that it blesses you and maybe gave you something to think about. Maybe it was thought-provoking for you. I hope, at the very least. I don't know how anybody can hear the Gospels and hear the story of Jesus and not be moved, not be changed, not be different. I don't see how anybody could start their day hearing these words and not have a different perspective, a different attitude, and a different mindset for the rest of the day. And because, like I've said before, the Word of God is power, and faith comes by hearing. That's the broadcast for today. Thank you to all of you who support me and make this possible. Thank you for taking the time to listen. And, it is my privilege to do this. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. Peace and grace be with all of you. And until next time, God bless.